Happy Saturday. It's March 8th, 2025, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
We are two of your Airmail editors who are here to make sense of this wild world. But first, the news. If I did the math correctly, it was over 60 degrees in London this week, which means that I am officially forgiving the city for all of the weather-related sins it committed over the past 5 months. Meanwhile, in the U.S., things got very interesting in the White House's cabinet room when Marco Rubio went at it verbally with Elon Musk. What took them so long? Meanwhile, Trump has also claimed to have sent a letter to the Iranian government to negotiate a deal to prevent Tehran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. One thing's for sure, there is also a lot of angst over at Columbia University. The Trump administration canceled $400 million in grants and contracts to the university, blaming its failure to protect Jewish students from harassment during the protests that rocked the campus last year over the war in Gaza. But as usual, Michael, Airmail is the antidote to all of that.
It sure is. And as you note, Ashley, it's been a whipsaw week with news from the White House, and our colleague, George Pendle's going to join us to answer a question some are asking now. Is Donald Trump actually pulling a reverse Nixon? And yes, it's even worse than it sounds. Then it's March, which means a new issue of Airmail Look has landed, and Linda Wells, our wonderful colleague, is going to join us to tell us everything we need to know as we go into spring. And finally, Tesla used to be the car of choice for virtue signaling Democrats, but now liberals all over the world are unloading what some are calling their swastika cars in anger at Elon Musk. And our writer Simon Mills asks, will the MAGA loyalists step up to buy the electric cars and help with the loss in sales that's underway? So Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Well, it seems like a fool's errand to even try to get inside of Trump's head, but if anyone's going to try, it is our colleague George Pendle. He is an editor-at-large at Airmail, as well as the author of Death, a Life, and Happy Failure, among other books. Welcome, George.
Hello.
So, George, the entire world has been preoccupied by the events that took place in the White House last Friday when Zelensky and Trump famously came to verbal blows over the state of things in the Ukraine. But you've interpreted this quite differently from many of the pundits that we've been considering. So tell us about your view on exactly what happened.
Well, the events in the Oval Office were so shocking that, people were scurrying around for explanations for it. Most people kind of clung to what Trump said and did, which was that he, thought that Zelensky was wearing these combat fatigues, which he thought were disrespectful in front of the television cameras, which are Trump's favorite hallowed space, or they thought that Zelensky wasn't humble enough and he wasn't playing the supplicant enough to Trump. But there was one other theory mooted, that instead of being, something which happened in the office that day that caused this fight, it was something that had been long planned. And that is something which has a rather suspect name, and it's called the reverse Nixon. And many people thought the reverse Nixon was taking place in the Oval Office that day.
Okay, that sounds like a sex position, George.
There's no denying that it does, but it's not really at all. Basically, what the reverse Nixon is, it refers to Nixon's trip to China in 1972. And Nixon took that trip to open diplomatic relations with China, and by doing so, to move them away from the Soviet Union, with whom they were allied at the time. Now, the reverse Nixon is basically the opposite of that. It's instead of going to China to move them away from Russia or from Soviet Union, it's going to Russia and trying to move them away from China. And although we can say, this is a very strategic move, the reverse Nixon, and Trump isn't the most strategic sort of person. He's a transactional, impulsive person. There have been lots of signposts over the last few years pointing towards this need to separate Russia from China and basically to embrace Russia as much as possible. I mean, we've seen it in Trump's overt praising of Putin over the last few years. We've seen it in Project 2025, the kind of manifesto for Trump's regime at the moment, which basically lists China as the number one enemy of America, and Russia is down below Venezuela in terms of threat. And this kind of explains what was happening in the Oval Office that day, because if the reverse Nixon was taking place, Trump was making a kind of absolutely out there, on TV, show of his affection for Russia. He was showing Vladimir Putin that he could knock down one of Vladimir Putin's most hated enemies on TV, on international TV. And if he could do that, why wouldn't Vladimir Putin run up and embrace him?
I don't want to credit Trump with being able to play a game of chess here, George. This seems to me more like football. But Is this sort of a big distraction? Could one interpret these events between Trump and Zelensky simply as being a big distraction to take our eye off the China situation?
I think it could be. I think there is also something there when you look at Trump's past, that this reverse Nixon move has been mooted in his past. Like I said, he's a transactional guy, but one of the few people who he's held in high regard was Henry Kissinger, the original architect for Nixon's trip to China in 1972. Now, back in 2016, Kissinger met with Trump just before he became president and suggested that one of the main things he should do during his presidency was move towards Russia. And basically because China was the rising power in the world at the time. Now, a lot of things have changed since then. The invasion of Ukraine, in 2022 really set things back in terms of embracing Russia. But, Trump has never really, throughout the whole war, he's never really stepped back and said, Russia is our enemy. He still kept pushing and pushing and pushing and desperately tried to embrace Russia at every opportunity. Now, of course, it may not be that. It may be just he likes strongmen. He likes dictators. But there is the slim possibility that maybe this is a strategic plan, if not run by Trump, who, of course, can barely hold on to an idea for more than 24 hours, then held by some of the people around him, most notably J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance is a huge China hawk. He's basically taken on foreign policy, left Marco Rubio behind, and is now trying to reassert that America's number one enemy, despite the war in Ukraine, the number one enemy is China.
I think this is all fascinating. I think it's also, what I know is Russia is also very weak economically. China, of course, controls too much and is looking to dominate the Pacific. So Trump also seems to argue that leave Europe over there, it's going to take care of itself, and the real problem is going to be over in the Pacific, right?
That's right. And really, the reverse Nixon was brought to people's minds following the Oval Office because at the same time in Congress, there were hearings for a man called Elbridge Colby. Now, Elbridge Colby, he's basically up in front of a confirmation committee to become the number 3 man in the Pentagon. And Colby has been one of the great kind of brains for the China first, basically, foreign policy. We must go after China, And he said in an interview last year, he basically laid out what the Trump doctrine is, which is Asia's more important than Europe. China is more formidable than Russia. And the other European states are much stronger relative to Russia than the Asian ones are relative to China. And through that thinking, he's basically saying, ditch Europe, let them deal with Russia. We're going to concentrate on China. And this seems to be, if not from Trump, but from the Trump White House, this seems to be the way they're going. Now, there's just one problem with the reverse Nixon, if it is actually taking place. And that's like almost every analyst who has been asked, whether they think the reverse Nixon is possible, says it's not. It's not possible. The parallel between 1972 and now isn't the same. Basically, in 1972, China, its relations with Russia, with the Soviet Union, were at a low ebb. Whereas now, after 2 years of Russia relying on China to fund it, to buy its oil, to provide weapons for it, it's much closer than it was in 1972. China and Russia have this great relationship now, and Xi and Putin are personally very close. They've met more than 40 times over the last few years. And so the idea of them splitting apart because Trump humiliates one of Russia's, enemies in the Oval Office seems pretty implausible to quite a few people. But just because something's implausible doesn't mean that Trump won't try it. I mean, taking over Greenland seemed pretty implausible a few weeks ago, and now it seems to be on the cards. So the very fact that, the reverse Nixon might fail doesn't necessarily mean that Trump is not trying it out.
Yeah, he's trying to lie. And just today, the reversal of actually, I'm going to open up discussions with Iran now about nuclear weapons. But if we learn anything, the surprises, they just keep coming every day. And even as you note so astutely, in foreign affairs and long-standing alliances.
That's right. And perhaps the biggest surprise would be if Trump was actually doing something which required long-term strategy, which would certainly kind of be against his brand.
Yeah. The last thing I say, I'm reminded of that old SNL skit of Reagan that they do, he's the doddering fool when the cameras are there, and then the Oval Office door closes and he whips into this kind of maniacal, hyper sort of strategic thinker. But it's an update of that skit. Indeed. Well, for better or for worse. Exactly. Well, George, thanks for a very great and insightful thinking this week. I have a feeling you're going to be our reverse Nixon / Trump expert as we go forward. So we've got 4 years, and we'll be back discussing this many times. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Godspeed, George. I love talking to George about politics, Michael. It just makes me feel smarter.
Smarter and feel like I got a leg up on what's happening and how to be thinking about it.
I am totally ready to charm them all at my dinner party tomorrow night in the English countryside. Get ready, people. But Michael, first, I've got a conversation topic for you. Linda Wells, the editor of Air Mail Look, is here to tell us all about the measures that men are going to quote unquote pimp their sperm. That's right. But we also have lots of other things to discuss and a fabulous new issue of Air Mail Look, which is out right now. Linda is the editor of Air Mail Look, as well as the founding editor of Allure magazine, a role she held for 25 years. She knows this stuff. Welcome, Linda.
So nice to be here, Michael and Ashley.
Okay, so Linda, I'm going to get right into it because got a new issue of Air Mail Look. It's spring. The women are coming out of their cocoons, of their coats and everything. And I always think back to, whenever been in France, and especially Paris, I have this question, how come the women there seem to look somehow different than women everywhere else?
Well, that's a big question, Michael, and I'm not sure I can answer all of it, but I can say that I talked to a lot of women there, very stylish women in the fashion business or in the periphery, about how they approach aging. And that was fascinating to me because there's a very accepting aspect to it and a very sort of graceful, calm approach. So where in the US we think about anti-aging and fighting it and don't let it take us down and Brian Johnsoning our way through it with all kinds of millions of dollars of treatments and supplements and blood transfusions. In France, it's very lovely. They're working really hard, but they don't want to show the work. And they learn really early in their lives that they've got to take care of their skin. I talked to one woman who had her first facial when she was 10, which I didn't even know was humanly possible. I thought that was forbidden. So they do a lot of things that are constant maintenance, so you don't feel that kind of exaggerated 1 minute you're young and the next minute you look kind of crazy because you've done too much. So I got all the ins and outs from these women and share them in the current issue.
Is it true that it's just so effortless and there's a little bit of elan to it?
Well, there is an elan to everything they do. Thank you very much, as you know. But there is not an effortlessness and one woman, a French woman, said to me, all that business about effortless beauty is bullshit. We work really hard, but they work hard in a way that is sort of less aggressive than what we do in the US. It's less about attack, and more about accept, live, have fun, moderation, have a drink, go to Saint-Tropez and get a little suntan, but not too much, and go to a dinner party, laugh, be fun, and don't get too preoccupied with each line and mark on your face.
We talked a lot on the show when we had you on about Ozempic and the weight loss drugs, and now you guys have got the new rules of Ozempic kit. Am I saying that correctly?
You are saying it correctly. It's a word we made up. So
I
it can be
love
pronounced in whatever way you want to. The whole Ozempic story is happening so quickly and it's transforming kind of almost weekly. And so now we're at a place where we started out where people were very secretive about taking it, lied about it, hid it. And now people are much more chatty about it. And the writer goes to one of these events in New York, a society gala, and the women there who are smaller than ever, which this is hard to imagine they could be, but they are talking all about thanking their doctor and how much Ozempic they're on or the similar drugs, and many of them are microdosing. So we're seeing a shift in behavior. And there's also a shift in how people entertain and what people say they want at a dinner party and how all these things are managed. And it's interesting because people aren't eating as much. Obviously, they're not drinking as much, and they're disappearing before our eyes.
Yeah, Ozempic face and everything is happening.
Right.
So, Linda, we have a fascinating report by Judith Newman on the measures that men, potential fathers, are going to improve the quality of their sperm. Who knew this was a thing?
Yes, all you need to do is go on TikTok, like everything, and you will find out that it is a thing. It turns out, and this is just emerging science, but that sperm plays a role in maternal and fetal health. And it's so interesting because when it was issues of infertility, it was always the woman. It was, if you think about morning sickness, it's the woman. But it turns out that there may be a role in sperm in this. And so the first issue is the fact that sperm counts have dropped by almost half over the past 50 years. hormones. And so that's obviously going to affect fertility. And one doctor calls it Spermageddon. And she names obesity, drinking, drugs, especially weed, environmental toxins, and late starts to parenting as some of the conditions that are causing this problem. And then we also talked to other people who suggest that maybe there's an issue with intense heat. We know that all those tech bros are spending a lot of time in their infrared saunas, and bathhouses have become a sort of entertainment form. So there's that. And then there's also even something as stupid as keeping your phone in your front pocket. That heat could actually affect your sperm counts. It's still early. So all this has meant that lots of men who are thinking about impregnating their partners are getting in shape the year before they do this by quitting alcohol, working out. I'm not really sure if working out is going to make any difference, but eating well, giving up drugs in order to be ready to produce these super children.
I mean, don't you kind of love the fact that men have decided to optimize their nutrition and well-being the way that women have been forced to do for decades, centuries, millennia?
Right. I know. Good. And I like the fact that there are certain men who seem to be kind of proud of it and want to contribute. I think that that's a really good sign. But of course, with this comes products, and let's make some money from this. So now there are supplements designed for this, almost like prenatal vitamins for men. And there's even a cooling underwear called, and I'm sorry to tell you this, snowballs. And we have at-home sperm tests. So there's all sorts of things that men are doing to contribute more meaningfully to the health of their children.
Gentlemen, if you're not pimping your sperm, are you really even living? Well, Linda, thank you so much, not only for this great issue of Look, but for talking us through all of these important topics of the day. Get more at airmail.news/look.
Thank you both so much.
All right, Michael, have we given you lots to think about and plenty to talk about?
You have, as always.
Okay, well, there's one more topic that we simply cannot go into the weekend without discussing, and that would be the fate of Tesla. As our friend and colleague Simon Mills reports this week, the more Elon Musk opens his mouth, the poorer his company seems to fare. Simon is an editor at Wallpaper Magazine and a writer at the Times of London. Welcome, Simon.
Hello.
Okay, Simon, there's no bigger badge of shame now, certainly in London where you and I live, but also all over Europe, than driving a Tesla. How the mighty have fallen. What happened besides Elon Musk?
Well, they're not called Teslas anymore. They're called swastikas. I think last week in East London, on the side of a bus shelter, some very brave guerrilla advertising type posted up a self-made billboard that had a picture of Elon Musk coming out of the top of the roof of a Tesla, Seek Heiling. And the caption read, goes from a 0 to 1939 in 3 seconds, Tesla, the swastika. And this really seems to be indicative of the way people feel about this car now across Europe and actually in America. The figures in Europe, the sales figures are looking really bad. In the month of January alone, and this is actually just even before Elon's crazy stunt with the chainsaw, Tesla had sold just 9,945 vehicles in Europe. That was down 45% from last year, which is, I don't know much about the car industry, but I think that is actually disastrous. Even in California, the figures are down. There's been an 11.6 decline year on year. I think people are doing this because their cars, once so full of promise, suddenly feel grubby and spoiled and, white supremacy.
That's exactly what you want in an automobile. Simon, it's so interesting because, after the election, Tesla had a huge boom in its stock price, right? Like it was at about $480 in December, and now it's, in the 280s, or at least that's where it's been this week. It seems like the more Elon Musk talks, the poorer his company fares. And in fact, the more money his shareholders lose. So how do you track what's going on with him in government versus what's happening economically to his company?
He's undisputably the richest, well, so we led to believe, the richest man in the world. But he's also the world's worst PR man. I don't know what he thinks he's doing, because like you say, every time he opens his mouth and says something supportive of Nazis or the right-wing parties in the far-right parties in Britain or Germany, people unplug their allegiance to him. And he is very much the image of that car and very much the image of that car manufacturer. Elon and Tesla very famously have a $0 marketing budget because they believe that Elon is the marketing man and he's the voice of Tesla. He owns one of the biggest social media platforms in the world, so he can generate all the publicity for it. But he's not really doing a very good job at it. There are reports in New York of, reports and photographs of Tesla Cybertrucks with swastikas sprayed on the side of them. You can't really get a worse kind of paint job or new livery than a swastika on your car, can you?
I've also been seeing people with self-made little magnets and stickers on their Tesla saying, "I bought it before he lost his mind." I mean, it's sort of like they're just jerry-rigging their own apology notes for things, but it's here in New York.
I suspect there's going to be a lot of people trying to debadge them as well. And famously, Tesla cars aren't worth very much secondhand.
I mean, Simon, how did Tesla go from being the preferred car of virtue signaling Democrats like Leonardo DiCaprio into the favorite car of Kanye West?
It has similarities with the story of Hitler and the Volkswagen Beetle, only in reverse, and the narrative of that car mark reversed. Hitler brought out the Beetle designed by Ferdinand Porsche in the 1930s. And it was, designed as the ultimate symbol of the Third Reich. And latterly, after the war came to an end, miraculously rebranded itself as the hippie car of choice. And, every single free-loving, sort of dope-smoking, Woodstock-attending person in America and people the same kind of predicament in Britain and Europe had a VW. And so is probably the most accidental rebranding and reframing of a car ever. Elon's managed to do the opposite of that. He started off as promising this great new lifestyle to hippies and free thinkers and sort of, I call them Coldplay listeners. He's turned his back on them and turned his car into a far-right white supremacist vehicle.
I mean, Simon, there is one perhaps possibility, right, that we haven't talked about yet, which is the Fox News brigade, right? I mean, do you see a universe in which Democrats having abandoned Tesla and there's this glut of them on the market and they become less expensive, that, not just the far right of the right wing, but just sort of regular rank and file Republicans are going to be picking this up as some sort of a not so subtle sign of support for Trump?
Well, it's a very strange situation, isn't it? Because Trump is aligned with a president who is an oil lover. And he talks about fracking and he talks about drill, baby, drill all the time. So I don't know if they ever get together and discuss this, but, Trump hates wind farms. He hates alternative fuels. He wants everyone to drive a gas-guzzling, American-made petrol car. So I don't know how Trump and the Republicans can align themselves or square themselves with this dual fuel kind of argument, really, that Trump and Musk have, really.
I kind of see, Tucker Carlson getting on there, having a big telethon, or turning this into, he's like, screw those guys, let's go out and buy them and buck. We need to reinforce, buck up, Tesla stock and help our friend Elon out. I can see it happening pretty quickly.
Yeah, look, I'm one of those left-wing virtue signaling Democrats who bought, the entry-level Tesla and has been driving them for the last 5 years.
Did you get the free charging forever?
I didn't. I mean, I had to buy a new one when I moved to the UK, right? Because the steering wheel's on the other side now. So
yeah.
But don't worry, I'm going to get rid of it.
Steering wheel's on the far right now, baby.
With a way far right, it turns out. Don't worry, Simon. The next time you see me, I'll be driving around in a Prius. It's all good.
Good. Yeah.
All right, Simon, thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Well, Michael, on that note, it is the weekend. I know that you have something fabulous to recommend to us.
I do. It's a show that came out, a limited series that came out back a few months ago, but I kind of just catching up with it because I've heard some good things about it. Have you watched at all The Day of the Jackal, the limited series?
I have not.
So this one's based on the fantastic book by Frederick Forsyth, which then became a movie, a terrific movie in the 70s. But this has been remade, super stylish, with Eddie Redmayne in the lead, a guy who, like, I never saw as an assassin, but he's really transformed himself in this, and looks cool. The whole thing is shot beautifully. It's just really, really good. It's my sort of fix right now for espionage and intrigue, set across London and Germany and Spain and all points in Europe. Super beautiful locations as well. So really great. I'm enjoying it. It's called The Day of the Jackal and streaming now on Peacock. And you, my dear, what do you have for us?
Well, Michael, I don't know if I'd recommend it, but we certainly can talk about it. I did watch From Megan with love.
Oh, wow. I send you a note from Michael with my sympathies.
I mean, are you really surprised? Like, this is the moment that I've been waiting for. There was some global disaster that caused Megan to postpone the release of this. It was supposed to come out, I believe, in January or maybe February. Anyway, it's out now on Netflix. And Megan's show is an homage to and a celebration of domesticity, right? She cooks, she bakes, she entertains. There are mimosas on the patio. It can all be done on a budget, she says cheerily. To me, this is just the most canned, hokey thing you could possibly imagine. First of all, she didn't even film it at her house. It was filmed at a neighbor's. And I understand the need for privacy, but like, if you're going to be real, let's be real. Like, to me, this is the crux of this is the great Megan conundrum, where she wants so desperately to be this honest person telling you what really went on in the royal family. And yet it all rings so hollow. Like, there's something about it that just doesn't feel remotely true or heartfelt. Like, it's just very canned. It's very USA actressy, the whole thing. I found it kind of depressing, honestly. Like, after I watched this thing, I just wanted to go buy a box of Hamburger Helper, feed my kids a TV dinner, and start working on my own poetry or something. Like, it's just, she manages to kind of make the whole exercise feel shambolic. Like, she's just trying to sell us more junk that we don't need. I don't know what is next, like the rosé from American Riviera Orchard or whatever it's called now, As Ever. But it's like, dude, I'm not buying it. Nobody is. The more she tries to push it, the more I just want to turn off the show. So I watched one episode. I'm done. I took one for the team, Michael. And let's just leave it at that.
Leave it at that.
Okay, well, on that note, Michael, we wish you all a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Michael, will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alessandra Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan, and our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. The theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting, but in the meantime, be sure to subscribe to Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thanks again for joining us.